Number 1. Brittany Collips. There are people who enter our lives as guides. They stand at the front of the classroom, speaking about morality, about the future, about boundaries that must never be crossed. Parents trust them with their children. Students believe that this is a safe place. But what happens when the very teacher meant to protect those boundaries is the first to step over them? When trust, built day by day, collapses behind a single closed door. This story begins in what appeared to be an ordinary classroom. And it ends with a betrayal that a community would never forget. In the eyes of students at Kennedale High School, Brittany Collips did not come across as a strict or distant teacher. She was young, energetic, and always smiling as she walked into the classroom. Brittany knew each student by name. She remembered small details about their families, their dreams, and the worries that often come with being a teenager. For many students, her classroom felt easier to breathe in than others, a place where they felt heard and respected. Brittany did more than teach lessons. She talked with her students, encouraged them, and made them feel that they mattered. That sense of closeness slowly built a strong foundation of trust. No one suspected that behind the image of a devoted, warm, and understanding teacher, there were boundaries quietly beginning to fade. Outside the classroom, Brittany Collips appeared to live a life many admired. She was a wife and a mother of 3 children, balancing family and work each day like countless other women. Before becoming a teacher, Brittany had served in the military, a period that shaped her sense of discipline, responsibility, and service. To neighbors and parents, that background made her seem even more trustworthy. Someone who had once worn a uniform and now stood at the front of a classroom, helping shape the next generation. At the time, Brittany's image represented stability, maturity, and reliability. No one noticed that beneath that steady exterior, quiet fractures in her personal life were slowly growing, waiting for the moment they would surface. The first signs did not arrive with any dramatic moment. They surfaced quietly, through lingering looks and hushed conversations in school hallways. Students began sharing whispers about a kind of attention that felt unusual. Private messages, meetings that were difficult to explain. At first, it all sounded like harmless rumors passed around by young people. But the sense of unease grew stronger with time. Some students began to feel confused, unsure where the line between right and wrong truly stood. In an environment where teachers are expected to be protectors, that doubt carried weight. Life at the school continued as usual on the surface, but beneath the calm exterior, something was slowly drifting out of place. Everything truly began to change when the whispers no longer stayed among the students. Information was brought to the school administration. From there, the door to an investigation opened. Law enforcement became involved. The atmosphere inside the school suddenly felt heavier, far removed from the rhythm of ordinary days. Quiet conversations were cut short. Eyes avoided one another in the hallways. As investigators began their work, the truth slowly took shape. Students connected to the situation were called in one by one, facing questions no one ever wants to answer. With each confirmation, another piece of trust fell away. Kennedale High School was no longer the calm place it once seemed to be. For the first time, the community had to confront the possibility that someone they had trusted completely may have betrayed the responsibility placed in them. When the truth began to surface, it went far beyond the initial suspicions. The investigation revealed that this was not a single lapse in judgment, but a repeated pattern of behavior. At least 5 male students were involved. The meetings took place in private settings, including Brittany's home, at times when her family was not present. What unsettled many people was not only the number of students, but how carefully everything had been concealed. A phone became a silent witness. Messages, images, and private exchanges were gradually presented to investigators. For the students, it was the moment they were forced to confront what had happened, often with confusion and deep discomfort. For the community, each piece of evidence brought forward felt like another cut into a foundation of trust that had once seemed unshakable. As the case entered the legal system, Texas law drew a very clear line. Even when students are 18 years old, a relationship between a teacher and a currently enrolled student is still considered a criminal offense. The law does not focus on consent. It focuses on power. A teacher holds a position of authority, influence, and control, often in ways students may not fully recognize at the time. Because of that imbalance, responsibility is never placed on the young person. It belongs to the one entrusted with protection and guidance. Inside the courtroom, the story was no longer about personal emotions. It became a question of professional ethics and boundaries that are never meant to be crossed. The trial took place in the year 2012, under a heavy and tense atmosphere. What had once been hidden was now laid out openly before the jury. Prosecutors spoke of a betrayal of trust, not only of students, but also of parents and the educational system as a whole. The defense pointed to mutual agreement, but that argument quickly lost weight under the law. When the verdict was delivered, the courtroom fell silent. Brittany Collips was convicted on 16 counts related to inappropriate relationships with students and was sentenced to 5 years in prison. For some, the sentence felt like a necessary measure of accountability. For others, it still seemed far too small a price for a trust that had been deeply broken. After the sentencing, the consequences did not end with the prison door closing behind Brittany Collips. The Kennedale community was forced to look inward. Parents began asking difficult questions about oversight within the school system, about warning signs that may have been overlooked. For students, the sense of safety that once existed in the classroom no longer felt whole. Some carried lingering confusion, even an undeserved sense of guilt. The school itself faced an unprecedented level of scrutiny and pressure. The case became a stark reminder that when even one individual crosses a boundary, it can shake the trust of an entire community that once believed it was secure. The story of Brittany Collips comes to an end, but the questions remain. What leads someone once deeply trusted to cross such a clear boundary so easily? Was it a moment of weakness, a sense of complacency, or the belief that they would never be discovered? When trust is placed in the wrong hands, the consequences never affect just one person. And Brittany Collips is not an isolated case. In the next case, that boundary is broken in a way that would shock even more deeply. Number 2, Mary Kay Letourneau. There are stories that leave society not only outraged, but deeply confused. Because they do not end in the way morality and the law are meant to expect. A teacher. A child who was 12 years old. A relationship that began as a serious wrongdoing. And yet, many years later, it ended in a wedding. This story sparked debate across the United States for decades. And even today, it continues to leave behind questions with no clear answers. Mary Kay Letourneau was once seen as the image of a typical American woman. She was an elementary school teacher in the state of Washington, married, and the mother of 4 children. To colleagues and parents, Mary Kay appeared gentle, devoted, and deeply caring toward children. She taught her students with patience and attention, fitting perfectly into the image of an ideal teacher during the 1990s. But behind that image, Mary Kay's marriage was quietly unraveling. Ongoing conflicts, a growing sense of isolation, and the pressures of family life gradually pushed her off balance. Within the very environment where she was entrusted with protecting children, Mary Kay began seeking comfort in a deeply misguided way. And the person involved was a 6th grade student named Villy Follow. Villy was only 12 years old, a child still growing, not yet capable of fully understanding right and wrong, or the long-term consequences of adult actions. The connection between the two began quietly, hidden beneath the appearance of care and concern. But the truth could not remain concealed forever. As unusual signs began to surface, the adults around them started to grow suspicious. In the year 1997, the situation came to light. Mary Kay was arrested for an inappropriate relationship with a minor student. The shock spread across the state of Washington and quickly dominated national media coverage. Before the public could fully grasp the seriousness of the case, another revelation left many stunned. Mary Kay was pregnant, and the child was confirmed to be fathered by Villy. The law left no room for ambiguity. Mary Kay was convicted of a second-degree offense involving a minor. The age of the victim made the case especially serious. She was sentenced to prison and strictly prohibited from any contact with Villy. For society, this was a non-negotiable boundary. An adult had misused authority and taken advantage of a child's vulnerability and lack of maturity. But the story did not end there. After being released on bail, Mary Kay violated the no-contact order. She continued to meet with Villy and later became pregnant a second time. That decision led the court to withdraw any remaining leniency. In total, Mary Kay was sentenced to 7.5 years in prison. Her second child was born while she was serving that sentence. In the year 2004, Mary Kay was released from prison. 1 year later, something few could have imagined took place. She and Villy, who was then an adult, announced that they were getting married. The wedding did not bring a sense of closure. Instead, it sparked a new wave of debate. For many, it was seen as evidence of long-lasting manipulation. For others, it was viewed as a deeply troubling but personal choice. For many years, their relationship remained a subject of constant discussion. The media, psychologists, and society as a whole continued to raise questions. Could a relationship that began with a serious wrongdoing ever become something ordinary, or had the early harm never truly faded away? In the year 2020, Mary Kay Letourneau passed away due to cancer, bringing an end to a story that had lasted for more than 2 decades. The story of Mary Kay Letourneau is not only a criminal case. It stands as a painful reminder of power, distortion, and the long-term consequences of erasing boundaries with children. When a child grows up within a deeply inappropriate relationship, what truly remains in the end? And in the next case, that boundary will be tested once again in a different way, colder and far more unforgiving. Pamela Rogers Turner was once a well-liked physical education teacher in Tennessee. She was energetic, approachable, and always brought a positive spirit to the field. To students, Pamela felt like an older sister. To parents, she represented a teacher who was both friendly and trustworthy. No one imagined that this warmth and familiarity would become the beginning of a tragedy. Pamela was married, having wed a local sports coach. Her life appeared to revolve around athletics, the school, and a small community where everyone knew one another. In an environment like that, trust was built quickly. And for that very reason, the collapse that followed would feel even more painful. In the year 2005, troubling signs began to emerge. Pamela was found to be involved in an inappropriate relationship with a male student who was only 13 years old. He was a child still in the earliest and most fragile stage of adolescence. Messages and private conversations surfaced that went far beyond the responsibilities of a physical education teacher. Professional boundaries were crossed in a deeply dangerous way. When the situation was reported, the entire community was shaken. An investigation quickly confirmed that the inappropriate relationship was real. Pamela was arrested and faced multiple serious charges. For many people, the shock went beyond the legal violations themselves. It came from the realization that a teacher could cause such deep harm to a child entrusted to their care. The court sentenced Pamela to 8 years in prison. However, after only 9 months, she was released early and placed under supervision. It was an opportunity to stop, to sever all contact, and to begin taking genuine responsibility. For society, this was a rare act of leniency, paired with strict conditions intended to protect the victim. But Pamela did not stop. After her release, she continued to send messages and inappropriate video content to the very student she had been ordered to stay away from. Those actions were not only a violation of the law, but a clear display of disregard for every boundary and warning that had been put in place. The second chance she had been given disappeared almost immediately. This time, the court showed no leniency. Pamela was sentenced to an additional 7 years in prison for repeating the offense and violating the terms of her supervision. The image of a once well-liked teacher collapsed completely. A series of choices, made one after another, had carried her from the classroom to behind prison bars for the second time. Pamela's career came to a permanent end. Her marriage fell apart. Her reputation was damaged beyond repair. For the community, the case became a haunting question of how someone once so deeply trusted could repeat such serious wrongdoing. For the victim, the impact left behind could never be measured by a sentence alone. Pamela Rogers Turner was released from prison in the year 2012, carrying a name no longer associated with sports or education, but with betrayal and repeated misconduct. Her story raises a difficult question. What drives a person to continue making the same grave mistakes, even after facing the consequences? And when power is misused again and again, what can society truly do to protect those who are more vulnerable? In the next case, that betrayal will take on a different form, colder and even more unsettling. Case number 4, Deborah Lafave. There are cases that outrage the public because of their cruelty. And then there are cases that leave society deeply confused because attention seems to fall in the wrong place. When a teacher is arrested for an inappropriate relationship with a minor student, the focus should be on the victim and the misuse of power. But in this story, public attention drifted elsewhere. Appearance, youthfulness, and an image that caused moral boundaries to blur in the eyes of many. Deborah Lafave was only 24 years old when the case came to light. She was a middle school teacher in Florida, still very young for the profession she had entered. In the eyes of students, Deborah seemed approachable and friendly, lacking the rigid presence often associated with traditional teachers. To colleagues and parents, she appeared to be a newcomer with promise, someone early in her career, with no prior controversies or warning signs. Deborah was married to a police officer. Her life, at least on the surface, appeared stable and secure. A young teacher, a spouse working in law enforcement, a respectable, trusted profession. Within that context, no one imagined that Deborah could cross one of the most serious boundaries of the teaching profession, the line between being a protector and becoming a source of harm. In the year 2004, everything began to unravel. Deborah was discovered to be involved in an inappropriate relationship with a 14-year-old male student. He was a child still far too young to fully understand the consequences of what was taking place. This was not a single moment of poor judgment, but a pattern of actions that went far beyond professional responsibility. When the situation came to light, shock spread quickly throughout the school community. Law enforcement stepped in. Deborah was arrested and faced multiple serious charges related to inappropriate conduct involving a minor. What stunned many people was the initial public reaction. Instead of focusing on the victim, media coverage and public discussion centered disproportionately on the appearance of the young teacher. Images and commentary began to circulate, pulling attention away from the core of the case. The focus drifted, and the true nature of what had occurred was gradually overshadowed. The Deborah Lafave case quickly became a national point of controversy across the United States. Many people began to ask a difficult question. If the defendant had been a male teacher, would the media response have looked the same? The excessive focus on Deborah's appearance distorted the narrative. Meanwhile, the victim, a 14-year-old child, was gradually pushed out of the center of the story. Facing the possibility of a lengthy prison sentence, Deborah Lafave accepted a plea agreement. She admitted to wrongdoing in exchange for a reduced sentence. The court sentenced Deborah to 3 years of home confinement, along with 7 years of probation. The decision immediately sparked public outrage. Many people believed the punishment was far too lenient compared to the harm that had been caused. The story did not end there. During her probation period, Deborah violated the conditions set by the court. As a result, she was required to serve a brief period in jail. While the time was not long, it underscored an important reality. Leniency under the law does not mean that consequences simply disappear. The Deborah Lafave case left lasting repercussions. It forced society to confront difficult questions about media coverage and about bias in how crimes are perceived based on gender and appearance. At the same time, it served as a warning against allowing outward image to obscure the true nature of exploitation and the imbalance of power at the heart of such cases. The story of Deborah Lafave is not simply about the downfall of one individual. It is a reflection of how society responds to wrongdoing. When attention is placed in the wrong direction, who is left unseen? And in the next case, those same controversies will resurface more complex, more divisive, and even harder to confront. Case number 5, Brienne Altus, when boundaries collapse. There are cases that shock not only because of the initial actions, but because of what follows afterward. When the law has already intervened, when warnings have been clearly issued, boundaries are supposed to be restored. But what happens when the person responsible continues to cross those boundaries, even while awaiting judgment from the court? This story stands as proof of an unchecked downward spiral, involving a teacher who was once trusted. Brienne Altus was an English teacher at a high school in Utah. In the eyes of students, she appeared modern, well-presented, open in conversation, and easy to approach. Many felt that Altus understood students better than most teachers. To parents and colleagues, she was seen as a capable educator with a distinct style, someone who knew how to connect with her class and engage students effectively. Altus presented herself as an adult who was confident and in control. In an educational setting, that sense of closeness was often viewed as a strength. But it was precisely that blurred professional distance that allowed boundaries to begin shifting. No one realized that trust was slowly being placed in the wrong hands. In the year 2014, troubling signs began to surface. Brienne Altus was found to be involved in inappropriate relationships with 3 male students. This was not an isolated incident, but a series of ongoing interactions that extended far beyond the role of a teacher. For the students involved, the situation unfolded in a space of confusion, where they were not yet mature enough to fully understand the power held by an adult in a position of authority. When the incident was reported, authorities quickly launched an investigation. Altus was taken into custody, and the local community was left in shock. 3 families, 3 students, and 3 different stories of emotional harm emerged at the same time. A school that had once been peaceful suddenly became the focus of public attention and suspicion. What made the case particularly serious was what happened afterward. While out on bail, Brienne Altus continued to maintain contact with one of the individuals involved. Despite legal restrictions and clear warnings, the contact did not stop. This behavior not only violated the conditions of her release, but also reflected a disregard for personal boundaries and the consequences that followed. Utah handles cases like this under an indeterminate sentencing system. This means the court issues a broad sentencing range, while the actual time served depends on evaluations made by the parole board. For Brienne Altus, this marked the moment when her future became completely uncertain. The court sentenced Brienne Altus to a term ranging from 2 to 30 years in prison, a figure that left many people stunned. The sentence reflected the seriousness of the misconduct, its repeated nature, and especially the fact that contact continued even after her arrest. From the classroom, Altus stepped onto a path whose end no one could predict. Brienne Altus's career came to a complete end, and her reputation collapsed. For the community, the case served as a warning about how quickly boundaries can blur when proper oversight is lacking. For the students involved, the emotional impact would last far longer than any sentence imposed. The story of Brienne Altus raises a difficult question: why would someone who had already been exposed and warned continue to make the same wrong choices? When power is misused more than once, the question becomes who bears responsibility for stopping it sooner. And in the next case, that sense of betrayal would take on a different form, with consequences no less profound. Case 6: Katherine Runk. There are places society considers absolutely safe: schools, churches, spaces built on trust and moral guidance. But what happens when those very places become the setting for betrayal? When boundaries are crossed not only in education, but within the heart of deeply held values? This story left the entire state of Michigan in stunned silence. Katherine Runk was a Spanish teacher at a Catholic high school in Michigan. She was regarded as knowledgeable, professional, and deeply committed to her work. To students, Katherine appeared calm and proper, fitting the image of a teacher within a faith-based educational setting. To parents, she represented discipline and a sense of safety. The school where Katherine taught was not only focused on academics, but also on moral guidance and faith. Parents entrusted their children to the institution, believing that traditional values would be upheld. For that reason, any deviation carried greater weight. In this setting, boundaries were not defined solely by law, but also by religious trust. In 2014, a deeply troubling truth came to light. Katherine Runk was found to have engaged in an inappropriate relationship with a 15-year-old student. What made the case especially serious was the setting in which it occurred. The interactions took place inside the classroom itself, a space meant for learning and moral guidance, now associated with lasting harm. When the information became public, the school and parents were left in a state of shock. Authorities moved quickly to investigate, and the findings confirmed serious misconduct had occurred. For the local Catholic community, this was not merely a criminal case, but a profound blow to the reputation and integrity of the school as a whole. Public reaction quickly raised difficult questions. How could behavior like this occur inside a classroom? How could a teacher in a faith-based environment cross such clear boundaries? The outrage was directed not only at Katherine herself, but also at the school's oversight system and where responsibility truly lay. As the case entered the courtroom, a familiar issue resurfaced: whether the defendant's gender would influence the sentence. Previous cases had sparked controversy over perceived leniency toward female teachers. This time, Judge Nancy Grant directly rejected any argument suggesting gender-based bias. The court sentenced Katherine Runk to a term of 6 to 15 years in prison, a decision widely viewed as firm and uncompromising. The message was clear: regardless of who someone is, where they work, or the environment they represent, the misuse of authority involving minors carries serious consequences. The case caused significant damage to the reputation of the Catholic school where Katherine had taught. Parents were left unsettled, and students lost their sense of safety. The school was forced to face intense scrutiny from both the community and church authorities. Trust that had been built over many years was shaken by a single incident. The story of Katherine Runk leaves behind a heavy question. When religious trust and educational authority intersect, who is truly responsible for protecting the most vulnerable? And if even spaces considered sacred can be violated, what must society do to intervene sooner? In the next case, that trust will be tested once again, this time in a different form, no less unsettling. Case 7: Nicole Dufault. Some cases do more than end a career, they fracture an entire family. When a teacher is found to have misused authority involving multiple students over several years, the question is not only how it happened, but how it was allowed to continue for so long. This story is about silence, the misuse of power, and the cost of repeated betrayals of trust. Nicole Dufault was a high school teacher in the state of New Jersey. Among her colleagues, she was seen as diligent and responsible. To students, Nicole appeared approachable and attentive, someone who was always willing to listen. Outside the classroom, she was also the mother of 2 young children, a role that led many parents to place even greater trust in her. Nicole appeared to balance her teaching career with the responsibilities of motherhood. The image of a dedicated educator and a caring parent gave no one reason to suspect anything was wrong. Within the local community, she was seen as an ordinary woman living a quiet, stable life. It was this outward appearance that concealed a long-hidden truth beneath the surface. The situation only came to light when growing suspicions could no longer be suppressed. As students gradually began to speak out, the full scope of the case started to emerge. Authorities stepped in, and the investigation expanded. Each new statement added another piece to a troubling picture of how extensive and frequent the misconduct had been. The situation only came to light when growing suspicions could no longer be suppressed. As students gradually began to speak out, the full scope of the case started to emerge. Authorities stepped in, and the investigation expanded. Each new statement added another piece to a troubling picture of how extensive and frequent the misconduct had been. The news quickly spread across New Jersey. Parents reacted with a mix of anger and confusion, asking how a teacher could misuse authority involving 6 students without being detected sooner. The school became the focus of intense criticism, facing sharp questions about its responsibility for oversight and student protection. After several years of investigation and legal proceedings, the court sentenced Nicole Dufault to 15 years in prison in 2019. Under the law, she is required to serve at least 12 years before becoming eligible for parole consideration. The sentence reflected the seriousness of the misconduct and the number of individuals affected. Beyond the prison sentence, Nicole also faced profound personal losses. She lost custody of her two young children, innocent lives drawn into the consequences of actions they had no part in. The family did not fall apart in a single moment, but as the result of a long series of wrongful choices. Nicole Dufault's teaching license was permanently revoked, closing the door to any return to the education field. For the educational community, the case served as a painful reminder that friendliness can never replace clear boundaries, and that trust without proper oversight can become a vulnerability. The story of Nicole Dufault leaves behind many difficult questions. How could such misconduct continue and spread for so long? And when the person responsible is not only a teacher, but also a parent, who is left to protect the children on both sides of that role? In the next case, this sense of betrayal will surface once again at a level, and with consequences that would leave society deeply unsettled. Case 8: Britney Zamora. The classroom is widely regarded as one of the safest places for children, a space where they are protected, guided, and trusted to be free from harm. But what happens when, during class time and in plain sight of others, those boundaries are violated in the most devastating way? This case left the entire United States in stunned silence because of its severity and the lasting cost it carried. Britney Zamora was a sixth-grade teacher in the state of Arizona. She was young, qualified, and once regarded as an enthusiastic educator. To parents, Zamora was someone they trusted with their children each day. To students, she was the authority figure in the classroom, the person who held absolute power within the school environment. From the outside, Zamora's life appeared unremarkable, a young teacher with a stable job and a trusted role within the community. No one imagined that within that very classroom, a place meant to be absolutely safe, serious misconduct could take place. In 2018, a deeply disturbing truth came to light. Britney Zamora was found to have engaged in highly inappropriate behavior involving a student during class time. This did not occur in secret meetings outside the school, but within the classroom itself, a space where children were meant to be protected. The revelation left the public not only outraged, but shaken by the level of recklessness and the complete disregard for established boundaries. When troubling signs were discovered, the school immediately reported the matter. Authorities stepped in and quickly confirmed that serious misconduct had occurred. The news spread at an alarming pace. Parents were shaken, and the community was left in disbelief. A sixth-grade teacher, a child, and a classroom suddenly became symbols of a profound betrayal of trust. The public response went beyond outrage at Zamora's actions and turned toward a larger question: how could something like this occur during class time without being stopped sooner? The case stirred a deep sense of fear that even the most familiar and trusted spaces can become unsafe. As the case moved into the trial phase, prosecutors emphasized the exceptional seriousness of the conduct. Zamora was accused not only of misusing her authority, but also of violating the fundamental principles designed to protect children within the education system. Under Arizona law, this type of offense is considered among the most serious involving minors. The court sentenced Britney Zamora to 20 years in prison with no possibility of release. The severity of the sentence left many people stunned by its absolute firmness. It was one of the harshest penalties ever imposed on a female teacher for this type of offense in the United States. The message was unmistakably clear: there are no exceptions for this kind of betrayal of trust. Zamora's career came to a complete end, and her personal life collapsed. But the deepest harm did not fall on her. It belonged to the victim, the family, and the school community, those who must live with the lasting memory that a classroom, once trusted as a place of safety, had been violated. Case 9: Jacqueline Ma. Some individuals are once celebrated as symbols of the teaching profession, honored with awards, trusted completely by parents, and admired by students. But what happens when the truth behind those titles turns out to be entirely different? This story is not just a legal case. It is a dramatic fall from the heights of honor into the depths of serious wrongdoing. Jacqueline Ma was an elementary school teacher in the state of California. In 2022, she was honored as Teacher of the Year. Among colleagues, Ma was seen as dedicated and innovative, someone who consistently placed students at the center of her work. To parents, she represented an ideal figure to whom they could entrust their children. That image made what would follow almost impossible to imagine. Recognition did more than bring honor, it created an invisible layer of protection. Jacqueline Ma was trusted more deeply, granted greater authority, and given closer access to her students. In an elementary school setting, where children are especially young and vulnerable, that trust became dangerous when it was misplaced. In 2023, troubling signs began to surface. A subsequent investigation revealed a deeply disturbing reality. Jacqueline Ma was found to have engaged in inappropriate conduct involving two students, aged 11 and 12. Beyond that, authorities also uncovered evidence of prohibited materials related to minors in her possession. These findings made it clear that this was not a momentary lapse in judgment, but a pattern of serious and deeply concerning behavior. Investigators determined that Ma's actions fell among the most serious categories of offenses involving children. The young age of those affected made the case especially heartbreaking. The discovery of prohibited materials involving minors further underscored the level of risk and the concern over potential repeat behavior. In light of these factors, there was little room for leniency. The case moved into the trial phase under intense public scrutiny. Prosecutors emphasized what they described as a profound betrayal of trust at the highest level. An elementary school teacher, once held up as a symbol of the profession, was accused of exploiting that very position to cause harm to some of the youngest and most vulnerable children. In 2025, the court sentenced Jacqueline Ma to a term of 30 years to life in prison. The exceptionally severe sentence reflected the seriousness of the conduct and the imperative to protect children at all costs. It served as a clear statement that titles, honors, or public image can never shield wrongdoing. The Teacher of the Year title was completely revoked. Her career came to an end, and the reputation of the school and the local education system suffered serious damage. For the community, the case was a profound shock that deeply undermined public trust. For those affected, the harm left behind cannot be measured by time or by any sentence handed down by the court. Case 10. Alyssa McCammon. Some cases ignite public outrage. Others leave people in stunned silence because of their severity. And then there are cases that nearly collapse every moral standard society depends on, when the number of those affected is no longer one or two. When silence stretches on for years, and when authority within education becomes so deeply corrupted that there is no path back. This is the story that brings this series of tragedies to a close. Case 10. Alyssa McCammon. Some cases ignite public outrage. Others leave people in stunned silence because of their severity. And then there are cases that nearly collapse every moral standard society depends on, when the number of those affected is no longer one or two. When silence stretches on for years, and when authority within education becomes so deeply corrupted that there is no path back. This is the story that brings this series of tragedies to a close. Alyssa McCammon was a teacher in the state of Tennessee. She had taught for many years, long enough to become a familiar and trusted presence within both the school and the local community. To parents, she was an experienced educator. To students, she was someone who held authority over evaluation, guidance, and control. No one suspected that behind that sense of familiarity lay a darkness that had persisted for years. On the surface, Alyssa appeared to live an ordinary life. She had a stable job and a teaching role that carried social respect. That sense of normalcy kept questions from being raised for a long time. And for that very reason, the misconduct was able to continue quietly, without detection. In 2024, the case came to light and immediately sent shockwaves through the public. The investigation revealed that the number of students affected had reached 21, a figure that stunned even seasoned investigators. This was not an isolated mistake, but a long-running pattern of behavior that unfolded systematically and repeatedly across multiple school years. The gravity of the case extended far beyond the numbers alone. During the investigation, authorities confirmed that Alyssa McCammon had given birth to a child fathered by one of her students. This revelation left the public in stunned silence. It underscored a complete collapse of boundaries between adult and minor, between someone entrusted with protection and someone who caused harm. The news spread rapidly across Tennessee and throughout the United States. Parents were shaken as they began to realize how many warning signs had gone unnoticed. Students and former students started to look back on their memories with fear and confusion. A single school, an entire community, and dozens of families were drawn into a nightmare no one had ever expected. When the case went to trial, prosecutors emphasized that it was among the most serious instances of misconduct ever recorded within the state's education system. The large number of individuals affected, the extended duration, and the severity of the actions left no room for leniency. The court sentenced Alyssa McCammon to 25 years in prison, with no possibility of parole. It was a severe sentence, but one widely viewed as necessary. The judge emphasized that the punishment was not directed at a single individual alone, but served as a message to society as a whole. Children must be protected without exception from the corruption of those who hold power within the education system. Alyssa McCammon's career came to a complete end, and her public reputation was erased. But the greatest consequences were borne by those affected. 21 lives impacted in deeply personal and lasting ways. Trust in the school and the broader education system was severely shaken. The case forced authorities to re-examine how students are supervised and protected within educational institutions. Alyssa McCammon's career came to a complete end, and her public reputation was erased. But the greatest consequences were borne by those affected. 21 lives impacted in deeply personal and lasting ways. Trust in the school and the broader education system was severely shaken. The case forced authorities to re-examine how students are supervised and protected within educational institutions. The Alyssa McCammon case brings this series of painful stories about the betrayal of trust in education to a close. From classrooms once believed to be safe to individuals who were widely respected, the common thread remains the same: abused authority and silence that lasted far too long. The final questions still remain: how can children be better protected? And how can these boundaries be ensured never to be crossed again?